Imperva is the comprehensive digital security leader on a mission to help organizations protect their data and all paths to it. Only Imperva protects all digital experiences, from business logic to APIs, microservices, the data layer, and from vulnerable legacy environments to cloud-first organizations. With an integrated approach combining network, application, and data security, Imperva protects companies ranging from cloud-native startups to global multinationals with hybrid infrastructure. Start a free trial today and quickly protect your web applications at securityweekly.com/Imperva.
Created in 2005 and hosted by security industry veterans, Paul's Security Weekly is your source for in-depth coverage of the latest vulnerabilities, exploits, and security research. Our weekly security news discussion dives deep into the security issues we face today and potential solutions in a fun and lively atmosphere. Each week, we bring on guests from the security community to learn about their journey and discuss topics relevant to their work and research. You can also subscribe to our show by visiting securityweekly.com/subscribe or look for Paul's Security Weekly in your favorite podcast catcher. We've recorded a ton of content over the years, so we created Spotify playlists featuring some of our favorite episodes, including interviews with Marcus Random, John McAfee, and Chris Roberts, to name a few. You can find them at securityweekly.com/starter packs.
Welcome back to Application Security Weekly. We just talked with Eric Olden about identity management and lessons learned from SAML, like incentivizing adoption with easy implementations and using human-readable formats. I'm your human-readable host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with human-readable John Kinsella. It's just about time for the news, but first, one human-readable announcement, because you can now find us on Instagram. Follow us for highlight reels, giveaway announcements, and more at Sec Weekly. Plus, let us know what types of clips you'd love to see. I'm sure John has some good reaction shots, some good comments, and some other clips. So we would love to see many of those, not to put you on the spot. We have a lot of news this week. There's a very familiar, everybody talks about the Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report. The 2023 is out this year, John, and it's always a great report. I love the data visualization. I love the approach to it. But for me, this year was kind of a snoozer from an application security perspective. I didn't see anything that grabbed me, partially because I feel bad because one of their metrics or one of their data points was that attackers use the exploit vulnerability technique in 5% of breaches. So I kind of feel a little bit left out when half of the compromises are just due to stolen credentials. That's taking the easy way, obviously the way that works, but it seems the easy way.
That's an interesting read on it. I really enjoyed it. I think this is probably maybe this or the GitLab one or GitHub, one of those two. These are like my two favorite reports of the year. I love the snark and the humor and the subnotes. I mean, I was telling someone last week, like just rereading it just for the footers footnotes alone is worthwhile. My favorite on page 63, can you breach me now? Thank you, Verizon. It's interesting your read on it, though, because one of the top attack vectors which I saw in there was actually web applications. So while how they're getting into those web apps is, as you said, through credentials, they're still focusing on, I think it was 49%, if I remember right, was web apps.
Yeah.
But I think, so I didn't have huge AppSec takeaways either, but one of the things which caught my attention at least when I first started seeing it around page 65 for small, medium businesses. Another page or two in here is they started, probably maybe closer to 66, 67. They start actually mentioning the controls, which they feel if people paid a little more attention to specific controls, one of which is Control 16 for application software security, this would actually start having, and these are CIS controls, sorry, but these would start having a little bit better response. So it's not just saying, here's what's wrong, here's what's out there, or here's how to fix it. But I thought it was interesting to actually, and they don't do it always, but listing out some of the controls which are, core areas to focus around might help people. So we've got a bunch of thick reports this week, but as usual, we like this one. So maybe not as much AppSec as we want, but hey, it's still good.
Hey, it's still good. And indeed, and maybe we could be optimistic and say that, that 5% is because the applications are so nice and secure, so they're difficult to breach. But if you're going to get it in, you got to get in through the web. However, even if those are difficult to breach, we've seen some, I'm going to have to go to my go-to phrase, dead simple types of attacks, or at least dead simple bugs. There's the MOVEit has been highly exploited, and most of the conversations I've seen around the MOVEit transfer exploits are about APT use. The things that stood out for me on it was that apparently the APT sat on it for about 2 years before revealing it. So once again, we have this indicator of vulns sticking around, living for a long time. And then the company came out and said that they did a vendor code review and found some more SQL injection flaws, which again, in this day and age, SQL injection feels like that shouldn't be there, but at least I'm going to take the constructive lesson that there's in this type, when you have a dead simple vuln, maybe there's also a vuln density, meaning if you've got one type of SQL injection, that's likely a pattern that's going to be a lot of other places. So go start looking for it quickly. And, I have a sample of 2 vulns that were found here. So I'm not sure that I can meet the Wade Baker level of quality that we see in the DBIR, but that's going to be my reach.
So yeah, folks, we have a mixture in here of dead simple vulnerabilities for y'all to go and study, obviously not a leverage, but also there's some meaty stuff too. And I'll use this as an example to remind us all listening and speaking that we live in a bubble, right, of sort of the application security, cloud security bubble here on ASW, DevSecOps. Whereas we're like, oh my God, people still have SQLi problems. It'd be interesting to see a number of what percentage of applications out there are actually going through any type of code review. I would guess off the top of my head, I'm going to say 35%, maybe 30. So unfortunately, this stuff is so common. I think most of it is luckily hidden away, so we don't have to go through each and every one of them every week. But yeah, no, this one's been going around. I don't think I have much more to add. So yeah, just step outside our bubble every now and then.
We will. And I think that's a good reminder because one of the reasons I've also pulled in a Honda's Power Equipment, Marine Lawn and Garden, their e-commerce platform, had, again, on the theme of identity, had a password reset API that all you needed was basically the username, essentially, and you didn't need a reset token or anything else. And what was really neat about this write-up is that it's a great lesson in attacker-minded thinking because they go through, they exercise some of the account recovery, didn't work, and then they found this API that basically kind of been collecting dust. And so I forgot to ping Sandy about this when we were talking about API security. I bet she would love it. But here's a great example of just left that API unprotected. I basically forgot about it somehow, and it opened up, now reset a password to whatever you want it to be, and now you have access into the application. And one more thing is, I'll continue to let John just shake his head and read through this perhaps, because I wanted to add too, is that there is another conversation to have here in the sense of data isolation or tenant isolation, because when the researcher got into this e-commerce app, now it was just open season. They could go in, look at all the data. And so there are design discussions to have here, but it's definitely not something where we should not just say as an application security team group, go implement the OWASP top 10, or have strict design controls. This is where that development team needs to have a conversation, needs to have that threat modeling, if you will, to talk about how much time should we put into this data isolation if somebody is a malicious user. And I guess what I'm really trying to say is, what if we had a malicious user, a malicious insider, somebody with valid credentials? What's the impact, and do we accept the risk of that? So bring me back down to earth here. I'm starting to float away, John. Any reactions to this?
Great points. My first point, and why you saw me looking through the blog post, was, didn't we cover something like this? I don't know. I want to say about 10 episodes ago. We
covered their car side of things, I think. Yes, this is their non-car side of the e-commerce platform.
And actually funny, because that's going to go where I wanted to go with this, is on that threat modeling experiment. take a step back and think like a bad guy and go, okay, and the bad guys are going to be doing this too. For a large conglomerate like these automakers, I mean, think about Honda is Honda, all the Honda power equipment. You've got Acura, right? You probably have some other brands in there too. There's going to be sharing of technologies because that's how these large companies get their efficiency of scale and those type of things. So, okay, should I make a prediction that we're going to be seeing something like this for Acura in about 6 or 8 weeks? I hope not, but let's see. And the other side of that is if you are a mid-level application developer or manager at Acura, this is your warning. And I'm picking on them just because their name's in front of me, but our Honda's name's in front of me. But the same thing's going to go for the Toyota series, for the Nissan series, for the GM series, for the Ford, for all these companies, right? Oh, I don't know. We've had something about Ferrari in the news recently. Ferrari doesn't have multiple brands. I mean, they're owned by Alfa, right? So maybe something there. But the point being is it when you see that bit of smoke in one part of your property, go look somewhere else. And I'm running out of analogies, but that it's by itself, it's unfortunate. I'm going to try and stay positive this week and say, how do we keep learning about what we do and improve?
All right. Here's a test then. I've got, and you have as well, an article about appliances. Barracuda said, take our appliance and nuke it from orbit, because I love a good Aliens reference, which is just kind of amazing. It's a great transparency. So yes, in the spirit of being constructive, it's good to see that they will not just say, we'll send you the bill so that we can replace this rather than apply a patch. Positive. But I wanted to back up just almost the existential crisis of what is the need to run this type of appliance specifically, and how many orgs are running their own email servers? And that's the area that is, is this the bubble where SMBs just need that? They can't afford the bills of Microsoft 365 or the Google Workspaces or whatever it's branded right now. I'm not sure. I know this is an area that email servers is one of your favorite punching bags, John.
I think Google might have discontinued this product since we started the podcast. No, I'm joking.
It's now a chat program.
Let's see. Where do we want to go with this? So first, sort of shocking. So let's walk through exactly what happened here. So the product there was a vulnerability which the bad guys compromised. As a result of getting into the box, they had root access. It was a remote code execution was the first part. They get into the box, and it was a remote execution in processing or parsing tar files. So, the one thing that it's supposed to do right. But anyways, someone figures out you can, put a tar file with a string in there, which actually gets, you love this if you haven't seen it yet. It gets parsed and executed by Perl's QX command, which then runs a system call. Thanks, guys. And then from there, the guys figured out that they can start, upload their various malware into the box. And if you look at the Barracuda announcement page on this, linked off the dark reading link, man, it's a long post. And just like it's actually really interesting because it goes through all the IOCs, all the different binaries, all their MD5. Well, some sort of checksum, probably SHAs, yeah. The IP addresses, all your detection rules. It's really interesting to sort of read and think about, okay, as a responder, how do they scramble and try to keep track of if they're popped or not? But as part of this, it seems like what might have happened is they found a way to update the firmware on these devices. So once you've rooted the security appliance, how do you trust getting something back on there? So that's the problem why these things have to be replaced. I was reading through because I was looking to see if Barracuda at some point said we'll replace them for free or contact your sales guy. I haven't seen, oh, hey, your favorite paragraph's at the bottom. Your trust is important to us. I was supposed to stay positive. Damn it. How long did it last? We were 12 minutes in. But anyways, yeah, it's so that aspect is shocking to me. On the mail side of it, I mean, I'll reverse around and say this is one of the reasons you don't want to run your own mail servers, because you need some sort of way of doing anti-spam and antivirus and all those things, and you have to buy an appliance like this. Mm-hmm. There's software packages out there, right? But a lot of people like a box. So back to our Silicon Valley TV show days, where's the box? And I'll pivot over to the second one. Rapid7 mentioned or found a critical vulnerability in Fortinet's FortiGate product suite, which is a SSL VPN. I used to love those things back in the day because you don't have to worry about the VPN clients and all your users. And so, they work really great. But unfortunately, this too has a problem. And I think this is another RCE, yes. So yeah, they're not saying throw our boxes out, but it's a very long list of products. This product has been around for a while, this product family. So it looks like it's just update their products. So that's another one. I mean, again, I already mentioned I live in a cloud bubble. I haven't purchased a hardware device beside like a router or Wi-Fi or switch. In everything I do is cloud based. I mean, I'm playing right now with can I send more stuff up to the cloud and have less stuff local? And I'm still doing a lot of compute, but how can I burst out of my house? It's been something I played with for a few years. But I get it. I don't think it's SMBs, Mike. I think it's the larger enterprises that either have a team that know how to use this stuff, they have Exchange with 50,000 users, and that's, you're not about to migrate that unless you really want some pain. So they're out there, right? There's a vendor out there I'm looking at. There's a few of them, but one in particular that they've just broken in the last year or two, going from being a hardware focused vendor to now being, I think 51% of their sales is SaaS and cloud. So and they're bragging about that because that change for a vendor to do is really hard. How do you go about selling hardware to selling software, right? Like your sales team is going to change, your marketing is going to change, what you're actually manufacturing or you're not manufacturing is going to change. So it's a pretty major shift. And getting your customers to come along with you, hopefully not having to go find new customers because that's expensive. So I get it, but yeah.
Yeah, and Barracuda did have the cloud presence, the cloud version of those devices, which, especially for email, I don't think that email is not a really latency sensitive type of application. So if you're worried about the speed of light between the cloud and your own data center, don't be for email, please. You use the cloud. Do you want to talk about where we're talking about some vulns, and there's some other vulns here, or we're starting to to shift to kind of the builder side of things, the dev side of things, to bring us around to some memory management in Go, a language for minimizing coding flaws. You saw some very interesting things this week. Which do you want to hit first, John?
As I mentioned, we're going to get nerdy. So sorry, everybody, or here you go, everybody. Let's hit the Go one first. This popped up on my radar sometime in the last few weeks, but the article's from February 2nd. It's talking about Go 1.2. Go 1.2 came out quite a while ago, but one of the features they had in there is the ability to do something called memory arenas versus traditional memory management. So one of the problems which people, and this, the link here on this show is we like Go because it is a memory safe language in most cases. And part of the problem with that is performance. So while we go and we want our dev teams, we say, hey, go use Go, because it's going to be fairly performant, but it's going to be memory safe and a lot of good things which we as AppSec people like. The performance-minded folk may be in a machine learning team, or let's go say computer vision, but that's still machine learning nowadays. But in various areas out there, like say game programmers, I don't think you go see very many Go-based games out there. But these things are going to be, they say, oh, the performance. And one of the parts where Go's performance is frequently C-type speeds, but where it slows down dramatically is when it comes to managing that memory. The garbage collection, sort of similar to Java. The way it works is as you, in your code, start using a variable and then stop using a variable or a map, or any type of a data storage concept, I'll say, is as it gets used as it's declared in a function and used and then released at the end of a function, the memory, first you have to go and allocate space for it, use it, and then at the end it gets tagged as being released, and there's a separate garbage collection which goes cycling through looking for all those things. So that means it has to check each one of these things all the time, going, what can I actually free up now? What has that free flag on it? So what they said is, hey, well, instead of doing this one at a time, maybe we have like an arena. So a space which says, instead of treating things as each particular variable or attribute, let's treat it as an area, right? And then when we're free with that general arena, area, but arena, they go back and forth. Well, I go back and forth. So now that becomes sort of it's a way of speeding things up. So it's sort of interesting. the article, it shows sort of there's some interesting, flame graphs showing how that actually works its way down performance-wise through the app as you test with this. And then there's a PR which goes off to, I've got it closed now, but there's PR off to a link to a PR which has some examples of how you actually use this in code. So for folks who are out there doing Go, that's sort of fun. Let's switch over. I'll leave the rest one until later. We can come back to that if we have time, because that's a really meaty one. But I'll hit on two, and I'm going to do them first. Amazon created something called Cedar. It's just popped up on my radar end of last year when they were released. Well, they were working on what's now their Zero Trust VPN. It fits into that space. I don't want to get people, or even Amazon, icky at that. Some of them will call it that. But so they have a thing out there called verified access, AWS verified access. It's basically a zero trust VPN. You need one or more factors to say, to be in agreement that this user is allowed to have access to whatever application is behind it. That little thing I just said, how do you define that, right? So should be using, should be checking for antivirus, or where the user's coming from, their credentials, whatever that policy is. How do you write that, right? And what they did is they created something called Cedar, which is that policy language. What's interesting about this and some of the other stuff Amazon's worked on over the last few years, and the other cloud providers are doing it too, but automated reasoning and differential testing. So the idea here is that instead of just coming up with a language like, and Rego might be like this, so I don't mean to point them as an example, they're just first one in my head, but Rego or JSON or some other sort of language out there, some other sort of, configuration. I'll call it language for right now. What they're doing is actually, as they develop these, they are developing them with in mind to say, hey, we want to be able to do automated testing to make sure that this thing that works at scale. It's sort of a way of doing unit testing on it, right? How do we make sure that it is repeatable, reliable, scalable, doesn't have corner edge cases that are going to break? So you want to do it in a mathematical way. And that's what this blog post sort of talks about, how they're going through that and how they came up with that language for that. I don't think we've talked about on here, they also do this for IAM. So if you think about the scale of someone like, I don't know, let's pick another cloud provider, Oracle Cloud. I'm sure they've got something similar behind, I hope. But how do you do IAM at scale, right? You've got these fairly complex policies, you've got all the fairly complex authentication, authorizations, and everything along with that. How do you make sure that thing runs reliably at scale without breaking? Because that's going to be absolutely horrible, right? So they put a lot of effort into this, and this is a second example of that. And Mike, I'm going to shut up after I start talking about the third one, which you're probably heavily scared at the concept of LaTeX doing anything. So the author of LaTeX very many years ago, for those of us who used to have our resumes in LaTeX, came up with something called TLA Plus. He's over at Microsoft now. I forget which team. Microsoft Research. Leslie Lamport. So what TLA Plus is not a programming language per se. This is a, I think they call it not a procedural. I closed my other tab. But it's
a specification
thank
language.
You. I've got it in my notes. Yeah. Thanks. But so the idea here is, the top of the article mentions some of the cloud providers are using this. I think Amazon and Azure and some others. But you scroll down through the IEEE article, you'll see it's also being used by some of the spacey types. I think NASA's in here somewhere. Oracle. So there's a lot of folks using this. Yeah, ESA, not NASA. Sorry. But what you do with a language like this is, before you start programming, you come up with the specification of what you're trying to do in this language, and allows you to actually, in a mathematical format again, say what should or shouldn't be happening, how this thing should be working. It's being a lot more definitive in how you do this. I want to grab my notes real quick, because there was a sentence here I liked, TLA Plus. If you go through to the TLA Plus website, it looks like something from the 90s, so I get it. There's probably a joke there. But anyways, there's a sentence in there where he talks about why this sort of needs to exist. TLA Plus is based on mathematics and does not resemble a programming language. Most engineers are familiar with programming languages, but not with precise mathematical notation. I thought that was interesting, just from the point of view of the sort of part of the problem that AppSec is trying to fix, right? We have these languages which they have to be flexible, so people are able to do these creative things in the way that the human mind works. But that isn't really, well, we might think of ourselves as nerds in mathematics and all that type of thing. It's not, there's no formal proofs behind all this type of thing. So that's what TLA Plus is trying to provide, and why these larger orgs are, that have the resources to use this, right? Because we're not going to use this on my hello world. But those larger orgs that care enough and want to do this right, they're starting to look at things like this. So I thought that was pretty neat.
It is cool, and I do love math, despite not loving LaTeX. Sorry, but it does. What does come to mind is that aspect of the formal verification methods, and we haven't talked about that possibly at all. The fuzzing is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, where it's just throw a bunch of stuff, see what happens to the application. Whereas when Heartbleed came out, there was a big, at least on my radar, I saw a big push to formal verification, especially like the TLS implementation. How can we make sure that we can at least guarantee confidentiality in the design? And then obviously there may be implementation flaws like the Heartbeat that led to Heartbleed, but at least this is a step in that type of direction. And somebody like ESA using this, or the cloud providers, I think it does make sense. How can we make sure that our like Nitro systems are meeting the claims that we're making, or that our spaceship goes up and continues to go up without any learning opportunities? So yes, I think that's the best I can add there. Where do you want to take us next, John?
Let's see. You had the Wiz article around how to get rid of AWS access keys. I saw this, they didn't add it, but I'd love to sort of hear your take on what's going on here.
Yeah, and what was really nice about this was that short article, it's a nice walkthrough of just the idea that access keys, you don't need them. And so the author here, Scott Piper, also coordinating forward cloud sec. So we'll be keeping an eye on that as well. But he's walking through about, let's just get rid of these broad access, basically, broad access capabilities, and go down to least privilege. What was neat is that, yes, it's a walkthrough. This is how you step through, if you're not using some of these credentials, that's the easiest thing to get rid of. And he's identifying how to do that. But he points out a screenshot about what AWS is trying to do to help users. And what came to mind when I saw this was that cloud service providers, or let's just say SaaS developer or SaaS providers, starting to appreciate the UX, the user experience of security workflows, rather than just saying hidden in the documentation somewhere, use these type of access tokens, or don't use these types of access tokens. What if we actually pushed users and helped them make those decisions? Basically, rather than having to say we need an LLM to do this in Copilot, what if we just had a nice user interface that walked through and said, what are you trying to do? Command line, local code, third-party service, etc. Maybe you actually don't need the broad access key. So that was kind of what I was going with in this article. I threw a link to the very old Why Johnny Can't Encrypt, which was a similar discussion about PGP. And I thought this actually related a little bit to your invalids, your Firefox article as well, just in that sense of the UI and the user experience.
Interesting. I'll go in that direction. I'll comment on that screenshot briefly, because I don't want to say it irks me, but it trips me up, which I think is what it's supposed to do, right? So for folks who, you'll see in the article, if you go to create your secret key pair on Amazon nowadays, instead of just blast, there you go, they've got this dialog with 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 choices. Why are you creating it, as Mike was saying? Is it for a CLI, for local code, for application running on an AWS compute service, for a third-party service, for an application running outside of Amazon, or other? And you're supposed to pick one of those. And if you pick, depending on which one you pick, there's recommendations below of like, as maybe you shouldn't be doing this. You can use Cloud Shell instead. You can use CLI v2. And just use the Identity Center to do IAM as the section's suggestions for CLI in this screenshot. I've had places where when I was, recently getting credentials for something, as an example, just playing with Greengrass, their IoT stuff. And okay, well, which one of these boxes does it fit into? Well, it's an app. Okay, it's running outside of AWS. It's not really an application. I mean, it's an Amazon thing. And it's right. This isn't a bad thing. It's not at the end of the day. How much did it slow me down? Maybe 45 seconds to use my brain, but still, it was like, oh, okay. Well, I don't want to make this more complicated. I don't want them to put every product in there, which is needed. But like at the same time, I like it. It slows me down. But yeah, so it was noticeable and obviously stuck in my head. But there's always space for improvement. The Firefox one is sort of neat. So article over at Sophos, Naked Security. Firefox 114 is out. I used to make jokes with friends about, hey, Firefox version 35, which version are you on? I've stopped that, but they're still going. More power to them. No O days. But what they have in here is something called a teachable moment, which is sort of neat. So this leverages clickjacking and timing in the browser and a TLS cert, TLS cert error. So what someone's, well, I'm not sure. I think they patched it before someone figured out. I could be mistaken. But either way, what's going on is that the use case is if the idea behind clickjacking in general is you're trying to get someone to click somewhere on that screen and have them think that they're clicking on one thing when actually you've got a button there which they can't see, but they're actually clicking on the button, right? And that can be used for all sorts of nefarious purposes. In this particular case, they're combining that basic concept of clickjacking with the idea of it comes down to how do you get that person to click there, right? That's the idea. So if you can imagine that, we've mostly been to websites now in the last few years, most of us that, probably all of us, that either the TLS certificate is expired or the TLS cert, the name you're trying to go to, the domain name you're trying to go to in the URL doesn't match the name of the TLS cert, or maybe it's just misconfigured or something else is broken, but you get that ugly dialogue saying, hey, don't go here, are you sure you want to do this? And what they've figured out is they can predict how long it's going to take for that page to come up. So you have a page, you set up the button you want someone to click on, you go ahead and have some JavaScript code hit a TLS site that has broken has a TLS cert which is going to cause this error, and then that comes in right above, or if you get the timing right into rendering, your invisible button comes in above where you're supposed to click to go ahead and enter on, either button, right, on the TLS site. So that's the setup. Hopefully I didn't butcher that and people can follow along so far. And then you go to click on the, yes, I care, I still want to hit this site, and you've actually clicked on someone's button. So the question is, how do you fix that, right? What can you do to would you move the buttons around the screen like some of those captures? No, that's going to be annoying. You didn't like that idea? Come on now. But
keep going. What's next?
So the next idea is, okay, well, how about we randomize the timing in there? If that timing is randomized and the attacker can't predict how long it's going to take or when it's going to appear, then he doesn't know when to have his button. They don't know when to have their button appear in the right place. So it's an interesting thought piece from the point of view of that little walkthrough, but also is something as completely benign as like, hey, I want to display an error message saying that a TLS cert is invalid, may now be used and potentially for a vector for a clickjacking attack. So just again makes us think about what we're writing or getting other people to write.
It makes us think. And I should have included, there was the article in Dark Green about an easily exploitable Microsoft Visual Studio bug that opens developers to take over. I forgot to throw it into the notes, or I actually skipped over it because it seems simple. But on that theme, there was a package that you could, an extension that could be installed into Visual Studio. And if the extension had an invalid signature, it would say invalid signature, do not install this or be warned. However, you could include a bunch of new lines in that package description, and those new lines would make that warning scroll past the page. So it's similar to that concept of manipulating the user interface to obscure security feedback that's trying to be given to the user, but so that they miss it, they're not paying attention to it, or they carry on. So I did, when Eric said humans are the weakest link, I do always want to push back on that concept and blaming the end user because I think we have better controls. But these are two cases where it's surprisingly difficult to come up with good user interface controls to make sure we don't add too much friction, but still give users something informative to react to. Both of these, John, could have a CVSS score associated with them. Now, I'm not going to make you guess what the CVSS score for either one is because I didn't look it up myself, so never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But 4.0 is coming out for CVSS. I included a link to a presentation that slides about a little bit of the history of CVSS and why it's gotten to this 4.0. And to be honest, I kind of like it. I kind of like its direction, at least. And I like the idea that it's saying, originally CVSS was about technical severity. Stop conflating it with risk. And rather than just tell people stop misusing it, they're making some improvements about the attack requirements, the granularity of what it means for user interaction, what the scope is. They've actually removed the scope in favor of better metrics. They've retired remediation level and report confidence, because they were also saying that was just inflating scores unnecessarily, giving CVSS a bad rap. So I like where it's headed. And listeners, if you have comments, ideas, strong opinions about this, public comments are open until July 31st. So you've got a little over a month to provide your feedback, which we can also send them audio feedback, I suppose, John. Let's turn it over to you. What should they do different, better? What are your reactions here?
The first thought is that they're making it more complex. I like CVSS. I feel like in, again, our little bubble, I'm in the minority there. It seems like there are a growing number of folks who don't like it. Usually I respond back to them like, well, what about the temporal and environmental aspects? And they're like, right. What are those? I'm like, you don't know how to use a tool. I know there are some.
That's one of the big points that this is actually making too. They're supporting that for you.
And I know some people out there do have still arguments based off that. And unfortunately, I've forgotten them. But I like where they're going. I like the idea. I'm just looking at the calculator, because that's usually what I've done for probably at least since 2, is I'll send people to a calculator. I'm like, go play with it and understand how modifying those numbers changes the score. And I think one of the common things is, there's a startup out there I'm advising that they're trying to, if you're in a large org, we've had a few of these vendors on, and you've got 50, well, probably Security Weekly in general probably have had hundreds of these vendors on. If you've got a large org, you've got your scanner's done its job, pick your poison, whichever tool out there. Could be AppSec, could be WebScan, could be anything. You've got 50,000 results. What do you do with this? How do you fix? Okay, let's say we're going to do CVSS 8 and above. Okay, now you're down to 10,000.
Right.
So there's startups that are like doing really complex math, trying to figure out how to prioritize and put these things to the top. So I think CVSS itself can do that to a degree. But it comes down to who's going to go and modify those little numbers for each thing in there, and okay, can you get a tool to do that better or a better way? So there's definitely a pain point. I like that they're doing not so much directly doing OTN here, or I should say, I interpret it as
the safety metrics.
Yeah, but one of the aspects they're talking about is like, how is that used? Again, it is environmental, but what type of technology is it, or where is it being used in your org? So it's great to see them continuing to understand and update and get closer to, I'll say real world, probably, because real world is more complex. But at the same time, I hope they don't get too much more items in that calculator, because that's going to scare people away. We've got a lot of stuff going on, so I want to keep going. Your favorite, Phil Venables, has an article about delivering security at scale. It had a bunch of really good stuff in it, but let's hear it too hot. Anything catch your eye?
Yeah, I think it started off as that the idea that you want metrics, and it talks about the Pareto metrics that are in, and I'll quote from the article this: you want to. He describes it as metrics that capture the range of actions that reduce risk. Okay, good. And these are things like starting with what's the CVSS score, but then continuing to filter. So I think I don't dislike CVSS. I dislike stopping the conversation at CVSS, which I think this is what is talking to, and improving organization, the processes and tooling, so that measurement is it's reflecting the behaviors you want, rather than it's just making pretty pictures. So I think that is one of the aspects here, is that as you do come into the industrial approach, as it's describing, which is essentially scale, repeatable processes, automation, that you can't have that lone hero, you can't have that lone person that is always like saving the day or doing the right thing. It's great when you're small, you need to do this, perhaps when you're startups, but as you grow, don't burn people out is also another aspect of this. automate what is tedious, automate what needs to be done, and leave the people, the humans, to be thinking about the interesting things. What are the other big rocks? What are the other big changes we should be making within this org? Let's start to figure out what the lay of the land looks like. What are some metrics that show this is a problem, and then that can show we're making a difference to it. So that was where I wanted to wrap up my thinking for this week. John, I've talked a lot. I think you deserve the last words here.
I want to hit one point really quickly on this one. I thought there was a cool table in here. One of my big things this year is maturity of AppSec, or maturity in general of development. And he's got this table, artisanal versus industrial. So, and you were talking about a little bit, but just call it a few, like, hard to replicate versus as an artisanal aspect versus the industrial one is automation of specific tasks to enable individuals to support the wide mission more easily. There's about 10 different of these comparisons of and it is sort of, he's talking artisanal versus industrial, but at the same time you could say as you become more industrial, you're more mature in your process. So I think that's sort of neat. Man, I'd love to hit this Rust one, but it's so long. I'm going to do it really quick because I don't want to move it to next week's notes. So Checkpoint Research has this really great, very in-depth blog. I mean, this should be called a blog post. This should be called a book. Talking about Rust binary analysis, going through feature by feature. And the concept here really comes to the first sentence in the piece. I'm quoting a lot today. You attempt to analyze a binary file compiled in a Rust programming language. You open the file in your favorite disassembler. 20 minutes later, you wish you'd never been born. And really what's going on here is the way Rust is, again, we sort of like Go. We like Rust for both the memory safety and some of the other aspects of things it's doing to be a little more secure and modern. But also on the modern side, how Rust is compiling that into your binary, that code into a binary, is different than we're used to seeing from the GCC or Microsoft's compilers or things like that. So how someone who is either an incident responder or a security researcher looks at this thing and tries to open it in IDA Pro or whatever disassembler they're using, they're going to get a very different picture. So it sort of talks through how do you work on this? What does the memory structures look like? How is your actually entry point into the into the binary using main? For loops, what they look like, and it sort of walks through to give you a sense of when you go down this path, what is it? So again, to try and give context, I'm mentioning here for any poor person who has to actually go and do this level of debugging on their program, but also if you are doing some sort of response, this is a great one to bookmark and come back to at a future point. It's good for scanning through right now. There's a ton of stuff in it. I'm guessing this has to be at least a 30-minute read, if not an hour. I sort of went through it over a few days, but it's a good read. But anyways, I'm going to stop on that one. As I said, we'd start with some fluff and then end with some meat. So happy reading.
No, yeah, you definitely surfing the big waves at the end there, John. That's a great reference, and we'll have to come back to that too, because that does sound like a good deep dive. So listeners, do let us know what other types of deep dives would you like to hear from us, diving into Rust, Go, other languages, or other concepts. And while you're thinking of that, I do want to say thank you once again to John. Thank you for joining us. Please do subscribe, hit that like button, check out the show notes. And speaking of surfing, check out Neon Beach by Thought Beans. We'll see you next time on Application Security Weekly.